our series of conversations around fintech and its role in speeding the economic recovery, our virtual series. And when we started about a month ago, we kind of knew at FintechWomen, we intuitively knew that these are necessary conversations, but the path ahead on even how these sessions would frame out was unknown to us. We weren't quite sure how that's going to play out. And the response from all of you by participating in these sessions, by reaching out to us offline, by talking with us, has given us a good sense that not only are these necessary, these are also conversations that all of you would like to hear. So it has been really exciting for us in bringing these sessions to all of you, and even more, the kind of response we're getting from leaders across the region, and in fact, across the country, because our guest today is from New York. The response that we're getting from industry leaders in sharing their thoughts and in participating in these conversations has been pretty overwhelming. So this is seriously exciting for all of us at FintechWomen. Even more, we have a schedule that takes us into September at this point, and hopefully to October very quickly. So we're hoping that sometime between now and then we get past virtual and into physical in a very safe manner, of course. But till then, be assured that we're going to be bringing you a lot more conversations. And very shortly, we'll be sending out to all of you some more information, and also the ability for you to pre-register into multiple sessions well ahead of time. So stay tuned. And of course, all of this good work means there is need for a few thank yous to go around. So before we start, and before I introduce our guest very formally, a few thank yous. First, to all of you, the several folks that have been joining us from session 1, giving us your feedback, telling us what you would like to hear. None of this would make sense for us if you weren't attending and telling us and giving us your feedback, really. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting the sessions. And then a big thank you to Goodwin. If all of you are seeing the change from our first 2 sessions to this one, it's because our friends and partners at Goodwin have so very generously offered their corporate video platform for us. So it's stepping up our professionalism by several notches in what we're bringing to you. So thank you to Courtney Hayden, who connected us with Teresa and Olivia. So thank you very much. And then closer to home, I'd be remiss if I don't thank 2 fintech women that have been pretty much instrumental in bringing these events together. Catalina and Lisa. You've probably seen Catalina in many of our sessions. Lisa visits as well, and you'll probably see her later today. Both of them, so if you've been seeing I'm calling it the grooming of our public profile. They've been continually grooming, fine-tuning our public profile, as well as all the meticulous effort that goes in bringing these sessions together. So thank you to both of you. And all of that. So I know we're eager to get on speaking with Alessia, and then 2 quick housekeepings. If you have questions, this new format allows you to ask your question in chat, so please do. We've carved out time at the end. And then 1 quick pitch for our next session, because we're going to get so excited in talking through our session today, I may not have a chance to tell you. It's a very enigmatically named session that goes, Why COVID Will Teach You What Beer Taught Me. It's Fintech, COVID, and Beer. That's our next session with Gretchen Wilson. I hope you folks will join us. With all of that preamble, let me get on to the main show. Alessia Falsarone is our guest today. She is from New York, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. You're going to get to know her very well in the next few minutes and everything she brings to the table. What I'll share with you in a few minutes, or a few quick lines here, is she's a non-traditional financial services veteran, in that she brings so many different capabilities. She is global in her perspective. She's written several articles. One of one of the ones that I personally find delightfully different is she's a contributing author to Applying Neuroscience to Business Practice. And how different is that? And she's a financial service veteran, as I started saying in the beginning. Her work bridges the gap between traditional finance, innovation, and sustainability. And with her global perspective, she's on the board of an organization called the Center for Financial Professionals over in the UK. She's going to bring all of that collective knowledge to share with us and talk to us on where fintech is today, given where our economy is today and where the global economy is today, and then what the future might look like. So with that, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jagathi.
Of course, and I think we have been teasing everybody with the slide deck and the cover there. So maybe I'll start, Alessia, with asking you the first question that has been on my mind since we have started talking, and then let you kind of bring us to I guess the following conversation. But to start off with, COVID has pretty much upended everything we thought as normal. And of course, our focus today is more closer to fintech and what we think about fintech. But it has upended everything here in the US, of course, and globally. So when we spoke initially, you were sharing with us how, as part of the advisory board at the Center for Financial Professionals, your folks had started off the year with a forecast on what fintech leaders are thinking and where they think the future would be. And now there's need to reinterpret that in the context of COVID. So with that kind of opening, would you tell us where you were and where you are now?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for including me in your series. I think this is a fantastic place. I know that everybody wants to go back to in-person meetings, but I can tell you that because we have this opportunity to have, for example, a lunchtime sort of exchange of ideas as we go through this crisis, we are able to share even more virtually. So I enjoy this a lot more. I think if I were in the office environment, it would have been a little more difficult to carve out, half hour interacted. I think let me tell you a little bit just about where I was, so that I can tell you, because the Center for Financial Professionals caters to 400,000 of finance professionals, risk professionals, legal professionals, and compliance professionals pretty much all over the world. And all of them with the help of technology partners as well. That being said, a couple of years ago, the center felt that there was so much buzz about innovation and how much there was a transition in the regular, obviously, functions of any financial services company and beyond, that they needed to bring together sort of a working group. And so the center, in particular, the president of the center, Andrea Simo, who resides in London, brought about 59 people together in this advisory council. And the interesting thing of the advisory council is, as we started to realize, was we all had very different backgrounds that we were bringing to the table. And I'll share you where I was and how COVID left me thinking about technology, innovation, and where we go from here. Now, I would say that for me, just my journey has been made of, 1,000 steps probably, but it begins with a single step. And so what, it made me think what was my first step to look into the future that we have today? Not that I predicted COVID by any means, but it struck me because in 2018, I was invited to talk about, how I represent the incumbents, not the innovators, the incumbents. Financial company, old school, old fashioned, and looking into the future. And I was really humbled because I was with innovators coming from coin shares and coming from, the crypto world and everything you can possibly think about, digital assets. But the interesting thing, my first step is that 7 out of 10 participants at that symposium, which is, by the way, it was over 400 people, they were all wanted to talk about alternative data. And the most interesting thing about the definition of alternative data was, data that human beings can collect and process in an efficient way. And by the way, this was 1.5 years ago, not too long ago, right? That provided an information advantage. And that fintech would have been bridging that gap of providing an information advantage. And it was getting information before people do. And so I was really puzzled by it, because I was looking at it from the fact that human beings actually are the ones that are enforcing that collection of data. They are the ones that actually have the information housed, and they are the decision makers. But it was like a whole, and so coming from financial services, talking to financial professionals, I thought, my step in the future was really uneasy, put it that way, because I still feel like a human being, right? I mean, it's not like,
yeah, of course.
So that simple step ended up in something very different, that when I went back then, around that same time, within 2-week time, to the Center for Financial Professionals, and it was the first time that we were talking about thinking of creating a sort of fintech leaders type of model and publishing findings across our whole constituencies of 400,000 people. I started to realize that the things that we needed really to address were, why do we need leadership in fintech, and what does that mean? And for us back then, and again, this happened very fast, if you fast forward just 1.5 years ago, was, you need leadership to make sure that everybody would know who's in the ecosystem. I mean, I was at the CFA, Institute in New York, and yet I was, coming with this global view of leadership being cross-regional boundaries and domains, yet I was given an alternative data kind of, approach. And on the other hand, having transparency over leadership means also that understanding who was who in this global ecosystem was also clearing up gaps in terms of talent. And the talent void that I was seeing was really like how the incumbents and innovators could find a way to work together and partner, but that's done by human beings and by people that actually are stepping up on both sides to understand each other's needs. So leadership was really about providing transparency, what was out there, and filling in that talent void. And I really enjoyed that as much. I share with you the link to the report, I think. And what we did, we clearly divided that in specific steps. Again, I mentioned there were 400,000 people in our audience, 60 of us, and then 9 of us stepped up to actually devote much time to the survey. What did we realize? And we, they call us the cabinet, but there's no royal title. It's just, the way we remember each other, right, by name. Now, the interesting thing about how do we go about measuring this leadership before COVID, right? It was really that we needed to measure the 2 buzzwords that came about there were preferences surrounding the end users. What are people doing when they actually incorporate and integrate innovation, and how to address their expenditures, their capital priorities that they have for their budget. Now, that led to over 30 categories that we found. And when you see the categories, some of them are really basic categories. Very few are new categories that you would say, right? Blockchain, was put in there simply because the technology was not available before. Artificial intelligence had always been there, but it was bucketed somewhere else. In over 6-month time, we surveyed online and offline, and over 1,300 respondents came in to define really this leadership. And what did we find? We found that, the end user preferences and the expenditure priorities, when we first published this in January and COVID came, needed really to be readdressed, because the digital success that we were talking about really needed to go back and break old rules. What does that mean? That in a COVID time, these 2 transformations that we were looking at had to be really realized in between digitalization and digital assets, right? How do you digitize assets? And on the other hand, how do you spend time in making sure that you have digital offerings? So we had to scrap out when COVID came, this idea that leadership in innovation and bringing together incumbents and innovators was about preferences and was about capital expenditures. It was really about preferences need to be thought in terms of what digital assets you need, and those are the preferences as an organization, right? And on the other hand, which are your digital offerings with skills and collective knowledge and becoming an asset, right? And becoming an offering of a company. Now, when we went back and said, is this really novel? The fact that, again, you have this whole systemic, disruption of COVID in all parts of life. The fact that you have all these innovators on APIs that are not discussing anymore user preferences or feedback of that, but discussing instead how to protect or create new assets digitally. Is that something new? And so as you may know from my background, I also spend a lot of time with the MIT Global Technology Panel. And around the same time, their Center for Information Research had put together a research piece that I would encourage everybody to go take a look. And this is where this page is sourced, but it clearly is an idea that was out there already, but just when you consider like very small startups that needed funding and that were going through accelerators. Now, thinking that the same roadblocks that a very small scale, almost idea in early funding was having as a problem, COVID translated that as a problem for big organizations, mammoth organizations with bigger size, bigger scale. That was really eye-opening for us. So to me, even talking to some of my cabinets, colleagues, this realization was really something that brought us to the conclusion that we clearly needed to redefine things a little bit more. Now, how much some of these changes were actually, at play already or starting of COVID. And you can see that the main benefit that we asked ourselves about fintech innovation and the implementation of that, when they resided in customer experience, were always implemented as plug and play. So we got into that a lot of organizations that have put that effort in understanding pre-COVID the user experiences. We're trying still to segregate sort of the innovation, many for enterprise risk perspective, but on the other hand, others just to as an opportunity to find out more about the innovation and understand whether it could be a widespread benefit or it should just get insulated in a certain part of the organization. Now, what we found on the report was that the leading opportunities that were coming out pre-COVID, there was an advanced analytics and AI, we're still there. And COVID, if anything, amplified that leading opportunity implicit in advanced analytics. The only difference was in the investment priorities, because clearly COVID has brought, readdressing budgets. And I'm sure that many of you, no matter the size of your organization, you're looking very closely about where you're trying to grow, where the expenses are filled, which are longer term or which are R&D type of investment priorities. And the interesting thing is, in our survey, we had showed that the investment priorities were security, payments, and RegTech. But if you look at it and say how many of those investment priorities can be qualified as digital assets and digitized assets for an organization, COVID sort of lockdown, clearly the three areas were both. So I have not seen in my experience any of the sort of investment opportunities that were sought before COVID on security, on payments, or on RegTech being put on hold. If anything, though, I've seen a RegTech priority going on for the reason that cyber more and more overwhelmingly across jurisdiction has become a RegTech priority across any country has it. So even if you have in another region or business location, you know what I mean by that. But also another layer, right? That innovation needed to be of point of service. So rather the customer experience, it was about retaining customer trust. And that was one, obviously, to identify that in terms of RegTech priority. How do you make sure that RegTech innovation clearly prioritized customer trust, retention, or growing that trust? But also, how do you provide an offering digitally that is secure and, on the other hand, grows that trust without limiting the relationship that you have with your customer? So clearly, that was big changes that was going on before before COVID, that we have seen in the breakup between digitized assets and digital offerings during COVID, and investment priorities continuing to be, at least for the few months that we have been into the journey, right? Now, if you're thinking about other opportunities and other changing, those were turning financial innovation upside down, and it's not something that I believe anybody has an answer for, and it's just about bringing our collective minds together, that in a way, the importance of AI that was so in a way rampant and welcome before COVID, also has been drawn back into attention of retaining feedback, still going back to that alternative data, now called more broadly and more scientifically unstructured data, and how these user behaviors are operating. In essence, clearly, when you're looking at all the apps, even in the App Store, that are being downloaded, and all the medical, and also the safety, employee safety and well-being of employees that any financial institution is looking at, they're looking at from the side of, mapping those user behaviors, for example, with how many days you're supposed to be taking this year of vacation, right? And so that's something that also is clearly aligned with your medical coverage that any organization is looking at, including insurance companies, right? For how much they are in their with their employees. The other thing that is turned upside down is, and I don't know if it's an industry term, I usually call it that way, I call it IOS, but iOS Internet of Skills model, where clearly going virtual has actually put virtually many of the skills and many others that many of us didn't know, didn't realize that we possibly had to tap into. That continues to be really the case for turning the financial innovation upside down, because the integration of models that are based on human skills and competencies that all of a sudden go virtual can actually be operating in a plug and play format. Because you wouldn't realize efficiency for an organization. In other words, you can create clusters of skills within your finance department, your tax department, that then don't get redistributed. So the good news is, what is turning fintech upside down is this idea that human beings and human skills are actually being brought back together, and that the implementation that we have had before through APIs and so platforms allows for a redistributed benefit of fintech beyond the plug and play model. So that is something that I'll give you an example shortly, but it brings a lot of it brings a lot of new opportunities for companies, not only to be more efficient, but to make sure that people that sit in roles that are traditional roles within organizations continue to be part and taking stock of the redistributed benefit across. I think that's essential and very important. Now, there's also, oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to go back there. Let's see. Sorry. There's also, oh my God, I seem to have a problem with this slide. Sorry, I brought you to the end. Maybe there's an idea here. Somebody's hinting. This is near and dear to my heart, which is this is happening in the era of purpose, right? This is happening when we're thinking about how technology is allowing us to be broadening together or our skill set, but also the COVID response are being through open source design of all kind. So we are being thrown in a situation where the value add is not in the patenting of these ideas, but is in collaboration, is in peer networks like the ones that you all are creating, and not in trademarks. And again, Jagathi, I don't want to be out of time. I know I'm speaking a lot, so please feel free to interrupt.
Yeah. Actually, why don't you close out with this idea, because you said so many things that I want to ask questions about.
Yeah, please.
So here, so several things that you spoke are interesting for me. There's always a conversation that when we go through some kind of crisis, coming out of the crisis, and there's a lot of government influence on rebuilding the economy, we know that the regulatory environment gets supercharged. So it's interesting that you mentioned RegTech, and RegTech you mentioned in the context of both customer trust, you said, as well, and not that companies are ignoring customer experience, but they're focusing on retaining customer trust, which again is so interesting, because I think that then led to something else that you spoke about, which is when you mentioned AI. I think it was the previous slide, you mentioned AI, the iOS. I love the term. We'll probably be using that, Internet of Skills, and APIs. These were not technologies or concepts that we did not pay attention to, but perhaps prior to COVID. But perhaps, and that is interesting, because if I'd say that companies were 5 steps into digital transformation before COVID, it seems like applying these technologies that already have some kind of a baseline lift within organizations, that trajectory is rapidly growing. Is that right?
Yes, I see that a lot. I think that almost when I think about APIs or I think about trust, these are building blocks, right?
Yeah.
They're environments or building blocks for the individual nodes, the relationships to grow. So clearly, I see that exponentially being the case.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting also, because we always talk about change. Any kind of change is opportunity for growth, and it feels like, when you mentioned the 30 different categories before, and things like blockchain, which, by the way, another quick pitch for our audience: the next 2 speakers we have lined up will probably dive a little bit more into blockchain. But so we keep blockchain at a high level for today. But it also feels that there's opportunity for innovation because of all of this that's happening. Where do you see that innovation growing right now?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned blockchain, right? So before COVID, a lot of people were wondering whether, and I got somebody actually from University of Connecticut giving me the most interesting perspective on why the adoption was not as broad and fast. He was telling me, Alessia, because blockchain is just a hammer waiting for nails, right? So give me the nails, and I use the hammer everywhere. And he's like, we are training all these people here, right, that can actually build hammers, and now I need the nails. Give me the nails, right? So I think COVID actually, because of this redistributed benefit and the collaboration and the fact that there's also RegTech, for which you still have knowledge built in modular forms on a need basis. Unfortunately, for some of us that did a lot with the legal aspect of things, you have to make sure that who has the control button, who's a stakeholder or not, or a contributor, or is different, maybe the owner of the information. So that's essential. So I think blockchain will have, if anything, I've seen a lot more cases. So in June of last year, I keep a repository of use cases for blockchain for investments purposes. And there are 400 as of the spring of last year. So a year ago, you have 400 blockchain use cases, right? That investors could fully invest in, which also means they were open for, being adopted fully funded. When you run the case now, I think I have seen something like 15 to 20 be brought about in the first 2 weeks of just COVID tracing apps being brought about. Impressive, right? I have not counted globally of them, but I'm sure there is somebody that has. That is impressive. So I think blockchain is now having thrown at them a lot of more nails to solve, and infrastructure is there. So the good news is it goes fast. The growth is going very fast.
Right. So you actually said something that I was going to. You said the infrastructure is there, and I think that's an interesting term, because fundamentally, when you think about all the digital transformation exercises that companies and smaller startup organizations are building out, they're building that out. The foundational was getting everybody's big data sorted, call it big data, whatever, but data management, right? And then we went into largely analytical AI. And then with those two foundational elements, and the way I look at it, everything from blockchain to IoT to everything else can now come of age. So with kind of that kind of landscape, and like you said, the opportunity, the infrastructure is there, the opportunity is there. What do you see as possibly truly the opportunities going forward, and perhaps the counter of that too, right? The roadblocks that you see when we think about growth, innovation, and use of financial technologies.
Yeah, so if you don't mind, I'll really briefly just go back to the slide, because I think the biggest roadblock that we have, and I like to always end with a good note, so I usually speak about the roadblocks first. That we are told everywhere, decision makers on either R&D or budget or anything, or the people that are developing the technology, they're told that you have a disruption in oil prices, you hear about China every day, you hear about cyber threats rampant, that we're going to become all inward focused, right? And clearly, the mitigants are that now more than ever, you have had the opportunity to participate in those second or third degree of influence networks that you were not supposed to have before. Think about the companies that are now not reaching out just to their immediate contractors, but their subcontractors, right? Because they're asked to do it. They need to secure that link for the longer time. And COVID has been teaching us that all of this is doable. I mean, think about the meeting we're having, right?
Of course, yes.
Yet the biggest roadblock is still on reputational risk, because it goes to hand in hand in something that you discussed last time, you know, on your virtual series, that is digital identity. And now it becomes that digital identity of your employees, of your workforce, is actually part of your broader corporate digital asset. That had never been something that any human resources department had ever thought about, right? And that could be compromised. That also tells you that there is, and again, this is a sketch, right? The opportunity little man here, because it's who's in charge, right? We're still trying to define in charge of business innovation, and probably, Jagathi, in your work, you probably see very many different players. The enablers of that is that now you start to see these conversations surrounding, is it an R&D or is it more of a capital expense longer term? Is it reflective of organizational commitments? Investors are asking innovators all the time. And in the context of a generation that is all made of makers. So we are all makers, right? We wouldn't be. So I think that's essential. And I hope with that I answered your question, because, it's the way I see
you certainly did.
The way I see it, just to close it, is that we need to be outwardly focused, and this is an article that I don't know if I share with you, but I wrote it thinking about the 6 to 12 months view, and I still believe that through COVID this is absolutely true. Has to be partnership oriented, digital ledger again based, and designed in open architecture. If we want to be, and we ought to be, upward focused for the deployment of capital, that's what is essential. And again, when you see a growth of the APIs, regardless of the ride sharing or the food delivery, that's in our minds, empowers.
I think that's great points, and you and I can continue talking forever, and I hope that's the kind of energy FintechWomen also generates. But I want to stop and see, Olivia, were there any questions? And I see your note here. Okay, so let me ask this question. I like the slide. So I'm going to parse this out for you. Oh, it leads to the question, it leads to the point you just said that, along with all of these, what COVID has shown us is there's enough technology for us to continue doing business remotely. In fact, several of us are not expected to go back to our offices for a few more weeks, and even then it will be a little bit more slower than expected. So when you think about technology, and you mentioned, could you go back to your last slide, because I think it was related to that.
This one?
Yes, the open architecture. So when you mention open architecture and you mention technology, it seems like the model in which how people are going to conduct business is going to be different. It's more open source as opposed to internal. Could you speak a little bit more about?
Yeah, I mean, I think for what we are seeing, for anything that is purpose-oriented like us, how we interact an organization with another, an individual with another, a service provider with
Yeah.
we're always gonna be sort of, open architecture mode, but is designed within an organization, right? And that's why I think blockchain is essential, and the digital ledger powering that open architecture is essential, because you still need to retain a lot of, you still need to retain trust, and you still need to retain the safety of the information that you're sharing, or the data points that you're sharing, and how you go ahead doing that. I don't see a difference in between organizing designs on open architecture and then allowing instead the sort of nodes of how you actually put innovation into your specific company or function, being instead separately handled, being sort of contradictive, or and again, that's why the partnership orientation is key. I think we have seen in the medical field, there has been tremendous number of designs defined on the web that have been organized and shared globally in a matter of hours within open architecture mode, where the design then has stayed and been retained because of this digital ledger ability to retain, for example, the dimensions of the mask that your laser.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? So you
Right.
have parts of that you can keep within your own system and operating mode.
Yeah.
What you share, the roadmap, right? The blueprint.
Right. Interesting. So one more question here. Talking about innovation, does a pandemic, and especially this particular pandemic is more health, caused by health, as opposed to the financial crisis we saw about 10 years ago. So does a pandemic take us away very specifically from fintech innovation, or where does it take us in terms of fintech innovation?
I don't think this is taken away from financial technology at all. I mean, when I think some sources quote 30% unemployment. How can this not be a financial crisis, right? For many of us that work in an environment like that, I think deployment of capital. I mean, if you're thinking about finance being the source of everything that moves our society around, you can't have any growth in any business if you're not thinking of deployment capital. Deployment capital is tremendously affected right now. So the foundation is that if you're actually interested enough looking at who acted first, it was not necessarily hospitals or medical care. Medical care was trying to stock up on what was going on. The people that moved first were regulatory bodies, right? So there were organizations, central banks, that when they saw this, if you see the first word of law coming out of the first motions, were coming from monetary authorities and government entities that were doing regulatory, sort of trying to lift any regulatory burden to the deployment of capital and liquidity. Had they not done that, we're probably going to see a much worse situation. Yet we just don't recognize the role that they played. They played a tremendous role, clearly within the fictional opportunity, right? Right. So.
So to close it, because we are right about time right now, and I don't see any other questions pop up. So to close it, perhaps something close to FintechWomen's heart. Where do you see, when you spoke about iOS, the Internet of Skills, and one of the core kind of foundational elements for FintechWomen is building out skilling, right? Help upskilling for change, for technological change. Where would you direct us there? Where would you say, what are the areas of skilling, of skill building we should be focusing on?
I think the biggest portable area of skills right now is anything that is we are utilizing, and we find especially in educational technology. I really believe that many of the applications that are now being used for the purpose of doing, K-12 education or the likes, that some have been done by nonprofit organizations for a number of years. I'm part of one of those. It's called IEARN. You can look it up online. We have probably one of the first technology platforms to bridge any gap globally. I think there are educational technology platforms that were just sharing knowledge, right? So the purpose of sharing is your ability to retain the knowledge and the source of knowledge and connect people to reshare that knowledge. I think that is something that we are, we can learn a tremendous amount from that. And I think that there are also APIs in place there that could be easily translated into other financial applications that is less about movement of capital or data, and it's about more, sharing of the minds, which we have not had. And it's not the likes of Zoom. How can you create something together that we both share? And clearly you have to have these webs of network where you have a canvas for your project that you're working on and you're sharing. So I see that extremely important in the redistribution of work as well within our industry. And right now industry may not necessarily have access to those. So I see that a big opportunity for innovators in financial services.
That's a great point for us to end this call. So first, thank you, Alessia, for this. Thank you for sharing your mind with us today, because I think there's several points here, and even more important for our audience, if you see at the bottom, Alessia has very graciously shared the Center for Financial Professionals report, a lot of good meaty information, and we'll send a link with that in our follow-up email as well. So thank you for joining us all the way from New York, and I'm glad that COVID allowed us to get you to FintechWomen.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody that joined us today. Appreciate your continued support, and stay tuned for next week. In 2 weeks out, actually. In 2 weeks out, when we have Gretchen come and talk to us about COVID, beer, and fintech. All right, thanks.